Hey, this is Christy Mattoon here from Rewire. I am super happy to be here with you. I'm recording this in two different places, so pardon me if I'm kind of looking all over the place. If you haven't liked my channels on YouTube or Instagram or even Facebook, I'm over there too. Please go over, like my channels, follow me. I appreciate it. It really helps my standings, and so I really, really appreciate those efforts. I want to talk today about meditation and basically levels of why you can't get your brain quiet. I have so many people, in fact, pretty much everybody who comes in the door that I work with privately, all tell me the same thing. I try to meditate. I really, really have tried, and I can't do it. My brain never stops. My brain never stops. And so the question is why? What's going on? And I wanted to walk you through that for a second today and maybe give you a bit of an idea. And then I'm also going to give you some tips to start to conquer it. So hopefully this will be helpful for you. So why can't you meditate? Why can't you get your mind still? Most people, when they go into meditation, whatever kind of practice you're doing, that's the goal, is to get the mind still, to get the mind quiet. Sometimes we're focusing on other things, but then if your mind's not quiet, you're going to get all that mind chatter coming in, and you can't even focus on the thing you're trying to focus on, whether it's your heartbeat, your breath, whatever direction you're trying to take it. You just can't get your mind quiet enough to stay in that place. And so you get frustrated. And then instead of getting quiet, your mind goes even crazier, because now you're focusing on all the things that you're thinking about, and you're trying to make them go away, and you're trying to make it stop, and it just won't. That level of frustration that kicks in when this happens is actually part of the problem. So the fact that you can't meditate is not part of the problem. It's just one of the symptoms of the problem. Your mind racing like crazy is another symptom of the problem. It's not the problem either. So what is the real problem? What's really going on here? So let's take a look at that for a second. One of the things that I work with people on is getting their brain into coherence, meaning from left side to right side, we're getting good flow of chemicals across the center of the brain. Equal sides are talking to each other. It'll actually bring you into a level of a high alpha brainwave state. On a scan, your brain will start to light up in many different areas when you're in coherence. And so that's the state we want to get you into. That's what I work to help people do. The level of stress that you're under is almost like it's a level of fight and flight in some regard. Okay, whether it was created yesterday, or you think it was created yesterday, or whether it's a childhood issue from a long time ago. Okay, if that stays in your system over time, that level of fight and flight over time starts to shut your brain down. You can do one of three things when you're in flight and fight. You can run, you can fight, or you can freeze. And most of us in this day and age just freeze. We've been frozen probably for a long time. And I say the word we because I've fought through this myself. So I get it. I totally understand it. When you're in that level of fight and flight, you literally can't think, right? Think brain fog. Here's one of the issues of brain fog. When you're in fight and flight, your brain starts to close down pathways because it wants to put you in survival mode. It keeps you from doing other functions. It keeps you from doing other things, like sitting there and trying to meditate and clear your mind. It has to keep the channels focused on what they're focused on in order to keep you safe, even though there's nothing really going on. So we want to get that out of your system. We want to lower those chemicals of stress. We want to get you into brain coherence so you can actually sit and meditate. There's a little process I walk people through that seems to help, and it's pretty effective. So I'm going to give that to you in just a second. So think about the chemicals of stress for a second. What are they? The typical ones that we hear about are cortisol and adrenaline. When those surge through your system at the time of the insult, when that first starts, if not taken care of, over time will start to create other issues in your body, in your system. Right? So we end up with disease, we end up with all kinds of weird problems can happen from this. And it all starts from this emotional level that you were triggered into from an event that happened. You don't necessarily need to know the event, which is the good news, but if we know the feeling and we can take that feeling and go back, we can desynchronize it in your system and effectively help you not to have to fight with that anymore, right? So that's definitely the goal. So we want to get the level of stress down. We want to bring the levels of cortisol and adrenaline down out of your system. One of the things we know from science is that cortisol directly inhibits melatonin, right? The sleep hormone. So if you're in a lot of cortisol and have been for a while, you're probably not sleeping well. You're not sleeping well. That inhibits other things in your system and in your life, and it causes other problems. And you end up in this horrible spin out cycle. And then you're told to meditate, and you go to sit down and meditate, and you can't meditate, and you get even more frustrated. And here we are just like a guinea pig in the wheel. So we want to put a stick in the wheel and stop this whole thing, okay? So let me see where I'm at on my notes here. So one of the things that we do when we try and stop thinking is we think about the things that we were thinking about in order to quit thinking about them. The bad part about that is the more you direct your energy and your focus towards something, the more energy you put into it, the more it actually grows, it gets bigger. It doesn't get smaller. You're not unplugging it by thinking it and talking about it. You're just not, right? We're actually creating more pathways to it. We're putting those neurons and proteins together. And the pathways that wire together or that fire together, wire together, like we've heard all of this stuff. So how do you undo that is the question. And how do you get to a place where you can sit down and meditate? So we want to shut it off. So I got this idea years ago from a gentleman, and unfortunately I can't remember his specific name, but what he was teaching was part of the Silva method. And if you've ever heard of that, it came out of, I think, the 60s or maybe even before, I'm not even sure. But what he was teaching us was this form of meditation and a way to get into your deeper self and even to access other consciousness, what he called it, other consciousness, and how to kind of move the borders and boundaries of your own scope of reality. But the part that stuck with me, this part that was the biggest, that had the biggest impact in my life, was this part where he told us to sit down and meditate, and the first thing out of my mouth was, I can't meditate, my mind goes crazy. So what he said to do and what he had all of us doing was not to focus on the thoughts as they came in. You don't focus directly on them. You just notice them. And we've heard this before with different meditations, but this is a little bit different. Focus on it, let it go by. But as it's going by, you're going to talk to it. You're going to tell it, that's not me. Because what happens with some of these thoughts, if we've lived them and told stories about them and gone through it so many times in our head, we actually start living life as if that's us and as if that's who we are. Sorry, I had to look at my timer there, as who we are as a person. So we want to tell it that's not me. So go into your meditative place, maybe move it around, switch it up a little bit so it's not too much the same. You want to do something different. Sit down. As a thought comes in, as whatever that thought is comes in, notice it, recognize it, maybe point at it, do whatever you need to. Let it go by, but tell it, that's not me. What you're doing inside your brain is almost a form of brain confusion because for years, you've been accepting that as you. You've been telling stories about it. You've been telling stories to it. You've been creating life around it. Now you're going to tell yourself, that's not me. Point directly at it, notice it, become aware of it, and then let it go by. This should take a second at most for everything that comes in. The second you see it, notice it, that's not me, let it move. Okay, so it's pretty quick, and you're just going to keep doing that. I would say do that for probably about 5 minutes a day to start with. So this becomes a practice, and here's the other point of this. Without a practice, you're still practicing. Without doing something, you're still doing something. And if you're practicing the stories in your head, and if you're practicing the negative chemicals in your body by letting them stay there, you're still practicing. And you might not think you are, but it's why you stay stuck and why you stay in the place where you're at, why you can't meditate, why your brain is still going crazy. So it becomes a practice. I sit down 5 minutes every day and literally just sit there and I wait for stuff to come into my mind. At some point, that stuff's going to quit showing up. And you're going to start listening for sounds. Maybe it's the clock ticking. The second I hear the clock, I say, that's not me. Maybe a picture of something else pops into your mind, just something random, right? Maybe, I don't know why, but I just saw one of those little wiener dogs pop into my head. That's not me. Let it go by. Like whatever shows up, that's not me. Let it go by. Because the truth is, none of that stuff is you. None of it is. And that's why you can't get in touch with the self, with the true authentic self, because all this other stuff is just white noise in your system. So we're going to do that 5 minutes a day. Even after my brain is clear and everything seems to be organized and in coherence, I still do this little 5-minute meditation every day. Sometimes I do it more than once a day, even now. Okay, so that becomes part of the plan. So you're going to sit, you're not going to tell stories to it, you're not going to pay a lot of mind to it, you're just going to let it go by and point at it and say, that's not me. Make sure you're telling yourself that. We want to create that new place inside your brain that understands that's not you. So the other thing that I want you to do when you're saying that's not me is give yourself permission to not own it anymore. And it's simply, you can put that intention in at the beginning or throughout the whole thing. Just give yourself permission to not own this junk anymore. You have to just be able to say, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. I give myself permission to let this go. While you're in the meditative place of that's not me, it's pretty effective. To just do it out loud when you're not doing anything else, it kind of falls on deaf ears. Your brain's like, yeah, whatever. But if you do it when you're working on that's not me, it becomes pretty effective. Give yourself permission. I give myself permission not to allow this to be me anymore. Because you've always identified with it, and now we don't want to. So you got to let yourself do that. Okay. So that's the first part of it. You're going to practice that. The second part of it is do a whole brained activity. You've got two hemispheres of your brain, and one of them's probably more highly active at times than the other side. The other side's probably more highly active at some times than the other side. We want them to work together as a whole. You have a whole brain. We want it to work as a whole unit, not as two halves. So what a whole brain activity does is it will actually help put your brain into coherence. Right hemisphere to left hemisphere, front to back, cross, right, cross body. You got two different patterns. You got quite a few different patterns going on here. When you do a whole brain activity, and I'll give you a few different ideas of it, and I want you to look it up online because you can read even more about it. Google whole brain activities or whole brain state. You'll find information on it. A cross crawl, standing cross crawl, is a whole brain activity. So literally crossing, right, as you're marching. Keep your eyes open, close them, it doesn't really matter. It's interesting when you do that, just doing that by itself will start to bring your brain into a whole brain state. And then go into an activity. Go do something that normally would cause turmoil in your system and see what happens. The other thing you can do is what's called, or sitting in a whole brain pattern. Just sit down and cross your arms and legs. I tell my clients all the time, if you get into a tough spot and you get into a place where you're starting to get a little bit crazy feeling, sit down and just cross and breathe. Inhales and exhales. And just sit there and do this for a couple of minutes and let yourself come back into coherence. Okay? So, whole brain activity. You want to do something to get your brain back into a whole brain activity or whole brain state. Studies have shown that being in this state actually puts you into high alpha brainwaves, right? So just doing this by itself changes your brainwaves. You go from a panic state to whatever state you're in to a high alpha just sitting like this. If you're doing the activity of marching or crawling will do it too. Make sure it's cross body. So if left arm comes forward, right leg comes forward, and then it's opposite, like get on the floor and crawl with your kids. It'll put you back into a whole brain state. When they hook people up to scans to check this stuff out, and they're doing a whole brain activity of some sort, their whole brain comes online, right? Everything starts getting colorful. Side to side, front to back, those cross patterns I just talked about. It's crazy interesting how it all works. So whole brain state is going to make a huge difference. Now, if you think about this for a second, you're doing the that's not me statements in a meditative state, and you're kind of struggling and fighting through those, what would happen if you put yourself in a whole brain state, sat there for a couple of minutes, and then started doing the that's not me work? Your brain's coming into coherence. Your brain is going into a high state of alpha. It's going to recognize things differently. When you say that's not me, you're actually going to come into agreement with it faster if you're in a whole brain state. Does that make sense? I've gone way over on my time on here, so I really apologize. So right now, that's where I'm leaving you. I want you to do a whole brain state. I want you to sit. Every thought that comes up, that's not me. Let it go by. What you're going to start noticing is that during your day, as those thoughts roll in, you're going to see them, you're going to become aware of them, and you'll be like, oh, no, that's not me. You're going to start doing it as a daily function almost. It's going to just become a part of what you do until there's nothing left in there. And then you got to go search for things to think about. Isn't that weird? It's where I was at a couple of years ago. I was like, well, I really have to, like, I've got nothing I'm sitting here thinking about. I go read a book, right? There's all kinds of stuff you can do when your brain's not full of clutter. So that's kind of cool and fun too. That's an outcome of this kind of work, okay? So I want you to work on that. I had something else I wanted to tell you, and now I'm not going to remember it. I want you to keep watching these because we roll along. I'm going to actually give you some more information that you can add to this. So we'll be doing one a day for the next probably week or so until you've got all this information. But I want you to start doing this part today. Start doing it now and see where it gets you. Drop me a note. You can comment on this. You can comment. Go to Mind Rewire, at Mind Rewire. Like me there. You can go see me on YouTube. I've got all kinds of stuff on YouTube, and this will be up there also. Thank you so much. Blessings and peace. Thank you for being here.